Hello everyone, welcome to part 2 of the series, Biblical Wisdom on Money Matters. Today we're going to look at some key biblical attitudes on money and wealth. The realization that God is ultimately the source of all we earn and own should affect our attitudes, our thinking about money and wealth. The first appropriate attitude or response to this truth is surely humility. Whatever money and wealth we have is ultimately a gift from God. God is the one who has enabled us to get that job, to start that business, to make that money, and to buy those things that we own. There is therefore no room for pride. It came from God, not from us. If we are wealthier than others, this does not make us superior to them. It makes us more privileged than them. And if we remember last lesson from James, it actually puts us in a position of humility. We should be humbled by the goodness of God, that He has enabled us to do what we have done. So the first appropriate attitude is humility. The second appropriate response is gratitude to God. If God is our provider, then we should surely thank Him and thank Him regularly for His provision. Everything that we have has come from Him. So when we look at what we have, we should respond by thanking Him for it. And when we fall into that trap, and I'm sure we all do, when we fall into that trap of looking at we don't have, before we become ungrateful, we should quickly remind ourselves of what we do have and stay grateful. We should have an attitude of gratitude. The third appropriate attitude or response is an attitude of stewardship. Now, this one is an unusual word. It's an unusual concept in many of our cultures today. When I use the word stewardship, I mean it's an attitude that seeks to honor God in the way that we use what He has given to us. The principle of stewardship is that God has entrusted the money, the wealth that we have. He's entrusted that to us. And we now owe it to Him to use it in a way that honors Him who has provided it. The principle of stewardship is powerfully presented in the parable of the talents. It's a long parable, but I believe that we need to read the whole text. So let's go, Matthew chapter 25 from verse 14. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work, and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed? Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. The first 2 servants were good stewards of their master's money. They had been entrusted with different degrees of wealth. The first had been entrusted with 2.5 times more than the second. But both of them used that wealth to benefit and honor the master. They both put what they had been entrusted to work, and they both increased their master's wealth. Now the third servant was a bad steward. He did nothing with what he had been entrusted to him. He didn't even put it in the bank. Even if he had had 0 business skills, he could have at least put it in the bank to earn some interest. The principle of stewardship says, God has enabled me to produce this wealth. He has entrusted it to me. I will therefore honor him in the way that I use it. This means that we act responsibly with the money that God has entrusted to us. We don't waste it. We don't bury it. We put it to good use in a way that will honor God. The next biblical attitude is that of contentment. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 through 10. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmless desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Philippians chapter 4, verses 10 to 13. I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. And lastly, Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 10. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. When the devil tempted Adam and Eve, they had absolutely everything that they needed. Yet, he managed to sow discontent into their hearts, so that they were no longer content with the beautiful life they had in Eden. Instead, they wanted more. And friends, this form of temptation continues to this day. We have clothes, but we don't have those clothes. We have food, but we want that food. We have enough, but we want more. Paul wrote that godliness with contentment is great gain. And I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. Contentment is a key, friends. It is a secret that we need to learn. It's a secret that many fail to learn. let you and I learn it. From these texts, we can see that contentment does not depend on our wealth or on our situation. Paul's secret of contentment that he wrote about is to be content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I've met many people who are wealthy but miserable. They are slaves to discontent. They want more. They pursue more money relentlessly. And then I've met poor people who are happy. They are content with what they have. Poor children play happily in a tree, while rich children moan about not having the latest cell phone or tablet or software. Poor adults laugh together around a fire, while rich adults complain about the cost of repairing their luxury cars. Rich or poor, you and I need to learn the secret of contentment. Now, humility and gratitude, those attitudes we mentioned earlier, they will help us to find our way into contentment. You know, pride says, I deserve more, I deserve better. I worked so hard, I deserve to be rewarded. Prideful thinking sows discontent. But humility says, all I have is through the grace of God. This sows contentment into our hearts. And gratitude thanks God for what He has provided. It looks gratefully at what we have and not ungratefully at what we don't have. Paul says that contentment is great gain. If we can learn this, friends, we will be so much happier, so much more effective. But if we fail to learn it, we will be discontented, unhappy, and more vulnerable to temptation. Paul warned that those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmless desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. So let's learn the secret of contentment. The final biblical attitude for this session is that of servanthood. Luke chapter 17, verses 7 to 10. Suppose one of you has a servant plowing or looking after the sheep. Will he say to the servant when he comes in from the field, "Come along now, sit down and eat"? Won't he rather say, "Prepare my supper, get yourself ready and wait on me while I eat and drink. After that, you may eat and drink"? Will he thank the servant because he did what he was told to do? So you also, when you have done everything you were told to do, should say, "We are unworthy servants. We have only done our duty." Entitlement is an attitude that is becoming more and more common, and it's related to discontent. Entitlement says, "You owe me." Entitlement says, "I have a right to," whatever that means, and "we demand," whatever that is. If we allow the attitude of entitlement to creep into our hearts, we are likely to become discontented and demanding. These words of Jesus indicate that He will have none of this. We have no right to demand anything of God. Instead, we should have the attitude of a servant. God owes me nothing. I owe Him everything. This mindset, the mindset of a servant, will shift us from entitlement and discontent to gratitude and contentment. That's the end of part 2. In part 3, we'll look at some practical issues.